The stench of death hung over London like a persistent fog. But this was no ordinary mortality, this was a calculated massacre that would become one of the most chilling mysteries of the 17th century. In the year 1665, as the Great Plague ravaged the city, a far more sinister plot was unfolding in the shadowy underbelly of London's most respectable neighborhoods. At the center of this dark narrative stood a name that would be whispered in terror for generations: Thomas Malthus, a surgeon whose medical practice concealed a horrifying secret. Malthus was no ordinary physician. He moved between the city's elite households with an almost supernatural discretion, his reputation built not just on his surgical skills, but on his ability to make problems disappear. And in plague-ridden London, problems were abundant and life was frighteningly cheap. What made Malthus truly extraordinary was his unconventional approach to medicine. While other surgeons fought the plague with primitive treatments, he seemed to understand something deeper, something that went beyond the standard medical knowledge of his time. Witnesses would later describe him as a man who looked at death not as an enemy, but as a calculated opportunity. The first unusual reports began to circulate quietly. Wealthy families would call Malthus to treat seemingly hopeless plague victims, and remarkably, some would survive. But survival came with a price that few would understand until decades later. Rumors started to spread about strange medical experiments. Bodies would disappear from hospitals and morgues. Patients would be admitted with complex symptoms and then vanish without a trace. The medical community was baffled, but fear prevented most from asking too many questions. What Malthus had discovered was a method of medical experimentation that was generations ahead of his time. By carefully selecting plague victims, those already marked for death, he could conduct procedures that would be unthinkable under normal circumstances. His research went far beyond treating the plague. He was exploring the very boundaries of human survival. Historical records showed that during this period, Malthus had connections with some of the most influential scientific minds in Europe. Letters discovered decades later suggested he was part of a secret medical society that believed traditional medical practices were fundamentally flawed. But here's where the story takes its most chilling turn. What if Malthus wasn't just treating the plague, but was actually using it as a cover for something far more sinister? What if the plague itself was more than just a natural disaster? Fragments of evidence, medical journals, personal correspondence, unexplained patient records all pointed to a conspiracy so complex that it would take centuries to even begin to unravel. Malthus had created a network of medical professionals who shared his radical vision, a vision that challenged everything known about disease, survival, and human physiology. As investigations into his practices began to close in, Malthus disappeared. Not a trace remained, no records, no final medical notes, nothing. It was as if he had been completely erased from existence. The most haunting question remains: what groundbreaking or terrifying medical discovery did Thomas Malthus make during those plague-ridden years? And more importantly, who else knew about it? Some secrets, it seems, are destined to remain buried, waiting in the darkness, just beyond the reach of understanding.